Story 1. Hi, everyone. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, I'm not spoiled. I don't want their money anymore, but goodness, I desperately need it. So, I'm an 18-year-old guy who moved out about a year ago after I turned 18 to live with my boyfriend. I didn't officially move out, though, because his apartment is a one-bedroom unit funded by the state, and legally, he isn't even allowed to have guests stay over. Yet, here I am, and no one has noticed, despite regular inspections to ensure he's managing on his own. For context, he has diabetes, but he's fully capable of taking care of himself. Here's where it gets complicated. You might say I could just live with my parents, but I moved to pursue acting in one of Germany's largest cities. My parents, however, live an 8-hour train right away. Before my education officially began, my mom supported me by sending €5 a day for food, €35 a week. It wasn't much, but it helped. However, once school started, she stopped sending money entirely. I was taken aback and asked, "Why? What's going on?" Her response was essentially, "Good luck. You need to find an apartment and fully move out." But how was I supposed to do that without any money? My acting education was so demanding that finding a stable job was nearly impossible. Some days started at 8 a.m., others at noon, and the last train home was at midnight. Before school began, I'd had a job in the city, but the only available shift was from 5 p.m. to midnight. With my new schedule, it just wasn't feasible to keep working there, and, as anyone familiar with big cities knows, job hunting can be exhausting. Now, here's an even bigger issue. My mom loves bragging about me being an acting student. She takes pride in telling people about my accomplishments, even though she's had very little to do with me for quite some time. Instead, she relies on my boyfriend's mom to help us financially despite never having met or spoken to her. It's reached the point where my mom demanded I come home for Christmas, but I didn't have enough money for both the train ticket and food. I had to choose. When I told her, she went off, calling me a failure and refusing to lend me the €49 for the train ticket. I even suggested that the ticket could be my only Christmas gift because I just wanted to see my brothers and friends. She still said no. Eventually, my stepfather paid for the ticket, even though he was already covering my school fees. Speaking of school fees, that's the biggest issue in this whole situation. In Germany, there's a child support system where the government provides €250 per month for every young adult in education. That money, along with €250 from my stepfather, went directly toward my school tuition. However, here's the catch. My stepfather isn't legally obligated to pay me anything. My mom is, but she doesn't. Well, that's not entirely true. For every person legally registered at a household, there's an annual trash collection fee of around €60. Yes, just €60 a year. That's the only additional cost of having me legally registered at her address, even though I don't actually live there, and that's the reason she wants me to officially move out. She doesn't want to pay €60 a year for my non-existent trash. The kicker? My mom never explicitly told me it was about the trash fee. I don't know much about these things, unsurprising for an 18-year-old, and she only made vague comments about having to pay extra money because I was still registered there. I assumed we were talking about a much larger amount. Turns out, I'm not even worth a €60 yearly fee to her. They've only had to pay that fee once since I unofficially moved out last April. Once. To make matters worse, I was recently kicked out of school because I had too many absences due to being sick. Now, the government's child support has stopped, and my mom has essentially forced my stepfather to stop covering the rest of the tuition or supporting me financially at all. Here's the really stressful part. My school contract states that even if I quit or get expelled, I'm still responsible for paying tuition for the current semester and the next one. Over the next 7 months, I'll owe a total of €3,500, and right now, I can't even afford groceries. Legally, my parents are still required to support me, but since my mom is my only legal guardian, she's the one obligated to help. I don't want to take this to court, but she's left me no choice. She loves to post about me on social media, gushing about how proud she is of her wonderful son, but it's all for show. She wants the world to see her as a great parent while doing the bare minimum to actually support me. What I truly need is not public praise. I need to be able to afford to live. Yes, I'm looking for jobs, and I'll keep doing that. But her obligation to help me doesn't just disappear because I'm trying to make ends meet. What do you think? Could I take this to family court and win? Or is there another way I can handle this situation? Story 2. I was 16, hanging out with a bunch of kids from my rival school at a bowling alley. I'm a devout atheist who went to public school, and we shared a street with a private Catholic school down the street, hence the rivalry. However, I was dating a kid from this school. I befriended a few of his friends, but ultimately, I definitely felt like the odd one out. But that's only slightly important to the story. See, all of these kids, aside from my boyfriend, wore polo shirts and khakis. I typically dressed more gothy, but I made a point to tone it down, as to not scare the Catholic kids. So I'm basically wearing what I thought was normal. Well, while we were there, a group of younger teen girls, about 14, were a few lanes down, acting like a bunch of hooligans, dancing on tables. I had a strict mom, and the thought of what she would do if I acted that way made me shudder. I see their mom, just sitting there looking at her phone, paying no mind to her underage girls reenacting scenes from Coyote Ugly. The dude working had to yell at them to get down, and the mom did nothing. Now, as uncomfortable as I was about the situation, I decided it had nothing to do with me, and went back to my game and conversation. But one girl I befriended started getting jealous because these girls were flirting with her boyfriend, so she runs off to the bathroom, sobbing. Again, we were 16, so these things are so small, and her boyfriend, a nice guy, jokingly danced back, and this set her off. I followed her to comfort her. Big mistake. I don't really say much and let her ramble about how these girls are a bunch of ladies of the night and how she wanted to fight them and blah blah blah. I tell her it's not a good idea and that she should just let it go. So what does she do for the rest of the time these girls are there? She keeps shouting these derogatory phrases at these girls. Very shameful, and looking back, I'm definitely less comfortable now repeating these words than I did then. Well, I guess me following her into the bathroom made these girls think I was her friend, and I was. But this was like the second time I had ever met her, so we weren't that close. So, and I still don't know why. Maybe the other girl looked scary because she was bigger than them, and that made me an easy target. But they started harassing me. They would shout back at me, "Go slit your wrist, you emo witch," among other things. I tried to ignore it, but everyone in our group was starting to get uncomfortable too. Finally, the group of girls and their moms start to leave. As they start to leave, one of them stops at the door, turns to me and says, "I hope you die of cancer." I go off. The chick who initially started all of this stuff, and my boyfriend chase after me as I bolt outside, about to go beat some chick. But they are already loading in their minivan, so I finally decided to shout, and I'm not proud for sinking to their level. Have fun earning your living on the streets, witches. I guess this is what their mother didn't like. This woman comes back inside, sees me, and gets in my face about how she didn't appreciate me calling her daughter and her friends witches. I couldn't believe it. Once she finished, I jumped up in her face and started going off about how her children were saying these horrible things to me, when I wasn't the one shouting at them in the first place, and the sound of my voice should have been an indication. Her eyes got wide when I told her what the one said about cancer. And I told her, "So maybe you should learn how to raise your child and teach her how to act in public and talk to strangers." And that if she wanted a real lesson, I could call my mom, a cancer survivor and Army veteran. I was clenching my fist out of anger, and she immediately started waving her hands and backing away like, okay, and she left. I turned around to see all of these Catholic school kids, 10 of them, looking at me like I just rose from the dead. Now, I wasn't looking for anyone else's opinion, being all high on adrenaline and holding back the urge from punching that mother in the face, but I'm guessing I helped further some sort of stereotype about public school children. The one girl who started the whole thing never tried to start stuff with me after that day. I still wonder how that car ride home went. Honey, you can't be telling people they should die from cancer. That's not nice. But nice moves up there. Story 3. I used to work in parking control at a busy airport in Australia. I can tell you stories from those days, and after telling my friend a few, he said to put this on here as he thinks all you people in Reddit land might enjoy a good laugh. This one is called, Two Supervisors Tell Me Not to Listen to Each Other. Okay? So a little bit of background on how this job works. I used to work in parking control at a big airport. It has one domestic and one international part to the airport, about 5 minutes apart via shuttle bus. I was the guy who told you which taxi was yours, to move on if you spent too long at the drop-off or quick pickup zone, kiss and ride in Australia, where the Ubers were, covered control in the multi-level car parks and more. This particular day, I was on the kiss and ride section, or as we called it Row D at the domestic airport. Cars were allowed to pull up and quickly drop off or pick up people. If cars stayed longer than a few minutes, I had to move them on, normally to do a lap around the airport, or go to the nearby McDonald's to wait for their relatives to call them, so others could pick up their relatives. Due to the nature of how big the airports are, we normally have 3 supervisors or managers on at any one time. 1 for the domestic, 1 for the international, and 1 in the control room. Everyone was on radio networks, separate for each airport. The supervisor on domestic that night we shall call Dewey, and the one in the control room we shall call Huey. I was about 4 hours into my 8-hour shift, patrolling all of Row D when Dewey walked up to me and asked me to cover taxi rank for a while. Some people had been rotated around as we got someone to leave early due to being sick. Hey, no problem, Dewey. So I went to taxi rank. About 20 minutes into taxi rank, I get a call over the radio asking why I wasn't on Row D from Huey in the control room. I explained that Dewey asked me to do taxi rank. Huey said he needs me back on Row D now. I asked was no one on Row D, to which I found out no, so off I went back to Row D as Huey told me someone would soon arrive to do taxi. Another 20 minutes later on Row D, Dewey comes back in person and asks what am I doing here? Why ain't I doing taxi? I explained that Huey asked me to. Dewey told me not to listen to Huey. He is in charge on the ground at domestic, so I do what he says. I hesitated a little, but did as I was told. Back to taxi I went. Now I look back on things I think at this point Dewey's radio was down, low battery. This happens from time to time, and you don't always notice as you just think things might be quiet. I say this as surely Dewey heard Huey over the radio order me back to taxi. Like clockwork about 30 minutes later, Huey was over the radio asking why I left Row D. I told him Dewey told me to do taxi. I was cut off when Huey told me not to listen to what Dewey said. He was in charge, and if I didn't listen to Huey, I would be written up. If I mention another word about Dewey or the taxi rank, I would be written up. Okay, so back to Row D I went. Again. By now, I only had about 1.5 hours left on my shift, and I was looking forward to going home after this day. Again, Dewey found me on Row D and demanded to know why I wouldn't follow his orders and wasn't at taxi rank. He said Josh, not real name, was there and it was supposed to be me on taxi, so he came to find me. I tried to explain what Huey told me, but upon hearing Huey's name, Dewey was having none of it. He told me to go to taxi and not leave it again till the end of my shift or I would be fired. Figuring a write-up isn't as bad as losing my job, I complied with Dewey and went back to taxi. Again, and yup, you guessed it. Only took Huey another 30 minutes to get on the radio and scream and threaten me for disobeying his orders. I have to get over to Row D right now, or I won't need to worry about a write-up. I thought to myself, screw this. Both supervisors are having it out with each other, and I'm the punching bag in the middle they are taking their anger out on. Both Huey and Dewey told me not to listen to the other, you got it. So I went to the airport food court and had myself a feed for my last hour of work before heading home. Yup, I snuck out of work and clocked off without either of those dumb ducks finding me, was not in the mood for that. Turned my phone off as well, as I'm not supposed to listen to orders from the other, right? When I got in the next day, The manager was waiting for me with a smug Dewey standing next to him. Manager, Dewey and I all shuffled into the manager's office. The manager proceeded to ask me what I was thinking using the last hour of my shift to have a dinner break. I asked him if he saw the camera footage of me in the food court. Manager said yes, and again asked why. I told him both Huey and Dewey kept telling me to go to different locations last night, and if I didn't do what they told me, I would be fired. I told the manager Dewey wanted me on taxi, while Huey wanted me on row D. The manager looked puzzled for a second. He asked me if I was supposed to be at either taxi or row D. Why was I in the food court? I told him in more detail this time because Huey threatened to fire me if I didn't ignore Dewey, and Dewey would have my job if I didn't ignore Huey. So I did what I was told and ignored them both. Dewey cried foul, saying I was lying. The manager asked Dewey to step out of his office. Dewey only did so after much protest. The manager asked me to tell him the full story, which I did. He then told me to have the rest of the day off, sweet long weekend for me, as it was Friday. When I got back to work on Tuesday, I found both Huey and Dewey were no longer employed at the airport. My friend Josh filled me in that both Huey and Dewey chucked a huge tantrum in protest of my allegations. The manager telling them that the security footage of me constantly moving locations and testimony from other employees convinced him I was telling the truth. Josh was in the break room near the manager's office and heard the whole thing go down before seeing Dewey storm out of the building, followed by Huey, who looked defeated. The manager told me next time to call him, instead of just taking a dinner break at the food court, but I wasn't in any trouble. Wish I could say the supervisors that replaced Huey and Dewey were better, but that might be a story for another time. Side note, Dewey's radio could have been out of battery, or he kept it turned off on purpose so as to not hear Huey in his ear. Both Huey and Dewey had been at odds with each other for a few weeks over something, can't remember what. Either way, his radio wasn't on. They got fired for it in the end, so I'm not complaining. Story 4. I'm an 18-year-old female, but people often assume I'm around 15 or 16 because of my youthful face and noticeable acne. I have a condition called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, along with permanent nerve damage in my legs. This combination makes walking for extended periods challenging, so I rely on mobility carts in stores like Walmart whenever they're available. You can probably guess where this is heading. On one occasion, I went grocery shopping with my dad. He helps me with tasks I can't manage on my own, especially if I'm unable to find a mobility cart. As we walked into Walmart, I noticed 3 mobility carts lined up against the wall near the entrance. My dad mentioned he needed to use the restroom, so I got into one of the carts and waited by the shelves closest to the entrance for him to return. While I was waiting, an employee approached me and asked if I was waiting for someone. I told her I was waiting for my dad, but it didn't occur to me at the time that she might have been questioning why I was using the mobility cart. I didn't think much of the interaction and continued waiting. When my dad came out of the restroom, we started our shopping, but before we could get very far, the same employee loudly called out to me, "Ma'am, that cart is for people with disabilities only." Her sudden outburst caught me off guard, and I stammered, I know, I am disabled." Her response, "You walked in here, didn't you? You can walk around the store." I was taken aback, but tried to remain calm. I told her that the specifics of my disabilities were none of her business, but I assured her I needed the cart. She ignored me, walked over, turned off the cart, and tried to physically pull me out of it. At this point, my dad stepped in and positioned himself between her and me. His voice was firm but restrained as he asked, "What do you think you're doing? My daughter said she's disabled. Are you seriously going to interrogate every person who uses one of these carts about their health conditions?" The employee's face flushed red as she retorted, "She's too young to be disabled. She's just being lazy." The situation quickly escalated, and it was clear we had drawn a crowd. Security personnel arrived to assess what was going on. My dad and I explained the incident, and to her credit, the employee admitted to what had happened. The security guard asked if I had any proof of my disability. To demonstrate, I stood up, which caused my legs to buckle, and my right leg bowed inward. That was enough for him, and he walked away, leaving us to continue our shopping. The employee, still flustered, muttered, "Why didn't you do that in the first place?" I replied. "Because I don't need to prove anything to a random stranger with no authority." She seemed embarrassed, mumbled something unintelligible, and went back to her post. My dad and I decided to focus on finishing our shopping and moved on from the incident. Some people, honestly. Edit to add. After we got home, I called Walmart's corporate office to report the employee. Although I didn't know her name, I provided the time of the incident and a description of her. I'm not sure if anything will come of it, but I wanted to make them aware. Update. I also filed a police report and contacted the store manager. The officer I spoke with said he'd see what he could do, while the store manager promised to investigate and assured me there would be consequences. I'm hopeful that something will actually be done, though I'm not entirely convinced the officer took my report seriously. Still, it does seem like some action is being taken. Story 5. I read stuff like this all the time, but I've never actually had any stories of my own to share. Until today. Let's start off with how I managed to run into this woman. I am less than a year away from turning 18 and finally got my first job. I work at Dunkin' Donuts, one of the ones fused with Baskin-Robbins. Yesterday was only my third day on the job. Everything was as it should be. I was working the drive-thru, ringing up the purchases and handing out food. Cue entitled woman. Even if I knew her name, I can't share it here. So let's call her Water Wendy. Wendy pulled up straight to the drive-thru window. She didn't even stop at the menu. She just pulled up. So I looked at her and, trying to be a good service representative, I asked if I could help her. She said she wanted a cup of water. So I got someone to help me because I can work the register. But I have trouble putting in orders for now. So my manager came to help me. She rang her up for a cup of water, 54 cents. This is where the issue began. She apparently had a protest going on in her head that she didn't express verbally, because she got out a couple of pennies. I'm thinking, oh okay, she's gonna give me 4 pennies and 2 quarters. Oh boy, was I wrong. She proceeded to hand me, one by one, 54 pennies. Eventually, she finished and drove off. Afterwards, my manager apologized to me, telling me that she comes every day and gets free water. But she was told the previous time that she now has to pay for the water because she kept coming in multiple times a day for free water. She, of course, threw a fit and swore she'd never come back. Lo and behold, she had come back with 54 pennies. I figured after that, the chances I saw her again would be very low just based on the amount of customers I get per day. I was wrong yet again. She pulled up again this morning, during our morning rush, holding up the already held up line. What happened is as follows. Cast is me, assistant manager, coworker 1, coworker 2, and Water Wendy. Me, hello. How can I help you? Water Wendy. Yeah, can I get a cup of ice and a side cup of water? Just a second. I turned around to face any of my coworkers who would hear me. Can someone help me ring her up for a cup of ice and a cup of water? Coworker 1 looks out the window. Oh no. Assistant manager, what's going on? He walked over to the window and realized the situation, then rang her up on the register. I followed suit, reading off the cost to her. Okay, that's $1.08. This is when the things hit the fan. Water Wendy, what? But it was only 54 cents yesterday. Assistant manager, yes, but yesterday you only wanted a cup of water. Today, you want a cup of ice and a side cup of water. So, the charge is for 2 cups. I come here every day, and this is how you treat me. Listen, that's not how this works. You can either pay and get your water, or you can leave. It's your choice, ma'am. Meanwhile, me, coworker 1 and 2 are laughing amongst ourselves about the whole thing. Assistant manager, ma'am, you are holding up the line during the busiest time of the day. Look, you have 3 different people behind you. She noticed all the waiting people, and I could see the gears in her head turning. Fine. Just put the water in the ice cup, and I'll pay for 1 cup. That's fine. He does this and waits for her to pay. Here we go again. Water Wendy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She's counting out in pennies. Is that necessary, ma'am? You have a lot of people waiting. Well, I'm waiting too. I have things to do and places to be. I don't have anything else but this. I don't carry cash with me. Everyone else behind you has places to be as well. Whatever. She paid and left. The assistant manager then told me and my coworkers that if she ever comes back, to call the police. This is because every time she shows up, she causes a problem, and my manager said that next time she shows up, she is going to be restrained from showing up again. Basically, if she comes on the premises, it will be trespassing. Story 6. On Saturday last week, young musicians had the opportunity to earn badges, bronze and silver. Both me and the Karen took an exam each. I did silver, and she did bronze. I did not see her there, not that I expected it, since my exam was in the afternoon and hers was at 8 o'clock in the morning or something. Later in the evening, our youth leader approached me and congratulated me for passing with a very good score, and asked me if I knew something about Karen's grade. I told him I didn't, and he looked at me with a frown. This is what he said to me. Youth leader, you know, normally, all the people competing call me afterwards, but since I know you don't like to call, I thought I'd just ask you now. Karen's teacher told me over and over again that she would not sign the form needed to enter, but in the end, her mother made her do it. She gave in, so I was very curious if she passed or not. I was skeptical as to why he would tell me that, but I didn't give it any more thoughts and enjoyed my evening. On Wednesday, yesterday to be exact, I went to rehearsal for the concert we have on Friday. I had my earphones plugged in, which I normally don't do, but the moment I entered the rehearsal room, everyone went quiet immediately. It took me a minute to actually notice and look up. I asked them why they were staring at me like that when our chairman approached me and put a hand on my shoulder. Me? Did someone die? Seriously? That was the first thing that came to my mind. Chairman: No, it's just Karen and her entitled mother are here. Why? He sighed really heavily, and everyone else pretended to be really busy, but I know they eavesdropped. Incorrigible gossip. You know, since Karen passed the exam on Saturday and now has the bronze badge, her mother wanted her to join the concert band again. I know what you want to say, but we don't want to start a war or something like that. They are currently discussing matters with our band director, but I wanted to talk to you first since they harassed you during the last few rehearsals before the Easter concert. So, what do you say? I was never fond of the idea of her joining, and I am still not happy about how things have been. Earning a badge doesn't naturally make her a better flutist and much less a better person. But if she's willing to learn and take advice if someone tells her she's wrong, I will not make a fuss about it. Thank you so much. I owe you something. Not really happy about that news, I sat down on my chair and started preparing by playing a piece that was lying around. I did my part with scales. I hate them and never want to play them again. I managed to play 5 notes when our band director, the entitled mother, and Karen exit the conference room, and I immediately feel the entitled mother's hateful stare on me. Unfortunately, my 2 friends couldn't make it to rehearsal that day, leaving me completely on my own. Band director: Ah, you're already here. Good. I guess you and the chairman already discussed matters. I just nodded. Band director: Well, I tried to reason with those 2 for the last 30 minutes. Listen, the entitled mother is convinced that Karen deserves to play first chair since she did so well in the exam on Saturday. Which was a lie, by the way. She barely passed. Don't worry, you don't have to give up your parts nor your chair. But I have to ask you both to play a piece at the end of rehearsal to see who deserves to have the first chair. Is that all right for you? I was already laughing inside because I know this will go on Reddit. Of course, no problem. There you have it. My daughter plays so much better than you, and she will prove it later on. I hope you're the one who will get kicked out then. My daughter didn't deserve to be treated like that. Yeah, whatever. Leave me alone. To prevent the entitled mother from harassing me again, The band director told her to go and come back and later to listen to her daughter if she insisted. She left with a smug grin, but I was already done with her nonsense and just wanted to get this over with. During the rehearsal, she played as bad as usual. It was a tragedy, honestly. My heart hurts when someone mistreats an instrument like that. We also played the piece with my solo part, and she had the audacity to play along. The band director told her off and started over, much to everyone's amusement. After nearly 2 hours of me resisting the urge to strangle Karen, it was finally over. Just as the band director handed us the sheet we would be playing from, the entitled mother came back with the smuggest look on her face. Band director, all right, who wants to begin? Entitled mother, I think she should begin since she thinks she can beat Karen. So my dear daughter can show everyone just how amazing she is in comparison to you. If that's what you want. So, I started playing. The piece was not particularly hard, and I've played it before a few times, but the part for solo flute is very tricky if you don't know how to play certain notes. And don't ask me what it's called. The title was cut off, and I honestly don't remember the composer. But overall, it is a regular silver-leveled piece, and that level is required as a first chair player. Yes, I did make my silver badge only last week, but I proved my skills and everyone was okay with me being first chair. After I finished, it was Karen's turn. But before she could start, the entitled mother demanded my flute. Again. Entitled mother, you should let my baby play on your flute to make it fair. What? No. But your flute is a better one and has a better sound. If she plays with her one, she will sound less good, and that would be unfair. Give her your flute. I told you once and I'll tell you again. Keep your hands off my flute. Buy her a better one if you think that's the problem. And if you try to grab it, I will hurt you. I kept my flute in my hands and glared at the entitled mother, and before she could say anything else, the band director told Karen to start playing. And, what shall I say? I wished I had recorded that. Those were the most embarrassing 5 minutes in my entire life. Karen made a complete and utter fool of herself, trying to finger her way through all those parts, not managing to get a single note right. She was completely out of tune as always. She missed the B flat all the time, playing B instead, and she ruined the solo part like a champion. Really, it requires skill to mess up like that. After she ended, her mother jumped from her chair and ran to her daughter. My baby was just nervous. She plays much better when she isn't put in a situation like that. This wasn't nervousness. She just proved that she doesn't belong in a concert band. Internally, I thought, she just proved that she should never touch a flute again. The entitled mother starts whining like a 5-year-old. This is not fair. They were not playing under the same conditions. My daughter is a much better player than she points at me, is. I demand that my daughter gets the first chair immediately. The band director was like 100% done with her. Of course, they were not playing under the same conditions. She is double her age and has so much more experience. There is a reason why she has the silver badge now. Please, just leave. And never ask for her to come back. We've heard everything we needed. And don't ever harass this lady here again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I got rid of Karen.